And we will end up putting this on the interweb. So this is also a time to turn off your screen if you don't want people to see you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Gurecki. I'm the CEO of Coalition Snow. Really excited to be here with all of you. Happy 2022. We made it through 21. I do not know I feel like going into this year, we have to be like, happy 2022, everyone. What's it going to be like? Shh. No one knows. So who knows? Anyways, fingers crossed about this year. I'm really grateful that all of you have chosen to be here with us tonight. And I'm so happy about our guest speaker, but Catherine's going to talk about that. But just Backcountry Beta is an event that Coalition Snow and True Gear put on in the winter. We do it the first Wednesday of every month, and our goal is to really just be able to provide some valuable resources and information about traveling in the backcountry that also kind of applies to side country and resort too. We do always like to say, though, that anything that we talk about here is not a replacement for professional avalanche education, any of the courses that you would take. So this is really supplemental or something to get you started. Definitely encourage everybody to get their Avi 1 before traveling into the backcountry. So that's just our little caveat there. And as I said, like this is an event that we are recording it. We will put this in the clubhouse and it'll be available for you to watch and anybody else to watch on the YouTubes. And I'm confirming our next speaker for February. But once again, like fingers crossed and quiet, we have someone really good who I'm confirming tomorrow. So I think that's it for the announcements. Catherine, can I turn it over to you and you can talk a little bit about how the hour will work and then let everybody know who our guest is tonight?
Let's do it. Hello, everybody. I am Catherine Donnelly, or I guess my name says Catherine Jandro on here, but whatever. I'm just seeing that. I work at True Gear, which is, we're an outerwear company based in Portland, Oregon, although I am recently relocated to Maine to be back closer to family. This is our third event of the season, and we are so excited to be partnering with Coalition. It's just, especially the clubhouse, how it's been growing over the year and a half that you guys have been, it's just been such a cool spot. I'm sure all of you can kind of attest to that in your own way. Just a really awesome place to meet people and talk and just, commiserate or I don't know, just talk and learn and even connect with people and get out and learn things from them in person. So this is a dream come true for everybody at True Gear to be able to work with Jen and her incredible team. And that kind of brings me into who we have tonight leading our event. I know it was in our event description, but it's still really exciting. This is someone who I've looked up to for many, many years, and she got me super passionate about empowering other women and people who identify as women into outdoors and action sports in general. I don't even know where to start on introducing her, so I'm just gonna kind of shove it her way and let her take it from here.
I am blushing big time. Thank you, Catherine. That's such a nice introduction. And what Catherine might not have mentioned is that Catherine is a former volunteer regional coordinator for SheJumps, which I'm going to tell you all about SheJumps. So love having that volunteer action. And thank you, Catherine, so much. So hi, everyone. I'm Claire Smallwood. My pronouns are she, her. Currently coming to you from Fernie, British Columbia, also the Tunaha unceded traditional territory. I used to live in Utah. I lived there for 12 years. I originally grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is not where a lot of people think of skiing as being kind of like a big focal point, but I got to tell you, the mountains down there are incredible. So if you've never had a chance to explore New Mexico, not just for the skiing, but in general, it's pretty awesome. And yes, I am the co-founder and executive director of SheJumps. And so I'm curious, I think in the Oh, raise your hand if you're a big fan of SheJumps and Claire Smallwood. I love it. Thank you. Jen, I'm a big fan of yours as well. Coalition Snow has been like really pushing the envelope and helping the industry to understand all of the ways in which it can be better and to step up. And I love that we've been working in tandem in that mission. So for those of you who aren't familiar with SheJumps, our mission is to increase the participation of women and girls in outdoor activities. What we do is we inspire women and girls, and that means, you know, we believe that all transgender, cisgender, non-binary people who identify with the women's community, that is who we're talking about. SheJumps inspires women and girls to jump, to push themselves past their limitations and take risks that result in growth, confidence, a connection to nature, and joy. So I think that's probably something that a lot of folks in here can get behind, considering you're all a part of the Coalition Clubhouse. So I don't think I really have any convincing to do on that front, but I did want to share a little bit of kind of context about the organization before we start talking about the Backcountry beta piece of things. So our organization is mostly volunteer led. We have been around since 2007. So that helps you understand that, it's been a long time. So going on 14, going on 15 years since we were founded. And really in the last 10 years or so, this kind of groundswell of like getting women and girls into the outdoors is something that like everyone can kind of like, we all feel that energy, right? Because it's noticeable in all the narratives in our outdoor media. And as well, it's like, you know, I think women are across the board really agents for change when it comes to understanding that there are other historically excluded populations as well, specifically women of color, that intersectional kind of piece of disability, all of that. So I really want to kind of pause and note that SheJumps started with this mission of getting, you know, just women and girls outside, but now we're really pushing to go a bit beyond that and to really make sure that we're identifying, just like Coalition, you know, tries to do as well, like, right, like looking at how we are making the space better, not just like coming to it with like, what are our needs, but how are we opening the door wider? So how we do that within our organization, as I mentioned, we're mostly volunteer led. We have about 150 volunteers around the country in 21 different states that host volunteer-led events. We have a lot of national events as well, such as the Alpine Finishing School, which I will talk to you about tonight. Our programs are, at least a third of all of our programs are free or donation based. That's really important for us to make sure that the outdoors remain as accessible as possible. And then beyond that, a lot of our programs are really geared around this idea of giving technical skills to people that want to really excel in these different areas, right? No one came out of the womb knowing how to do any of this stuff. And especially with imposter syndrome, which I'm sure everyone in here is probably familiar with, that feeling like, how could I know possibly something, I don't belong here? You know, SheJumps really works to break down those barriers and make it so that no one feels like they're a tag along, and that women have the ability and the skills and the tools to have conversations that allow them to make their own decisions in the backcountry or wherever, and really just kind of empower people to live a life full of adventure, no matter where you're from. So a little bit more about what kind of gives me the, I guess, expertise to talk about Backcountry Beta tonight. In addition to my professional work, being an executive director, it's not exactly, it's kind of an office job, but I've never made a life decision without thinking about how I was going to be able to ski. Like, never would happen. I worked as a guide in South America, as a ski guide for a company called Casa Tours. I also worked for Powder Quest, basically taking people around all the different like ski areas and side country. And that was an incredible experience for me in understanding how to navigate through completely unknown terrain where there's no avalanche forecast, not really even any ski patrol back when I was doing it. I've also spent tons of time skiing all across Canada. I now live in Canada, the Wasatch for 12 years. So for me, skiing is really a source of belonging. It's a space where I feel I can really be myself and I feel most confident. And I know that that changes from day to day, but what I wanted to talk with you about tonight is kind of this idea of, this curriculum piece that we've created called the Alpine Finishing School. There's two parts to it. It's the Alpine School. We have our Alpine Development School and our Alpine Finishing School. But I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of what we cover in these courses. And then I've got a special discount code for you. If anyone here is interested in accessing our recordings from our recent online Alpine Development School, love to extend that to you all with a special deal because y'all are part of the community. This is where we're at. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Alpine School. So the Alpine Finishing School is this program that I started with a guy named Ann Keller in 2012. And she came to me with this kind of idea of like, how do we take women from being like, cool, I've done my Abbey 1 or 2, I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry, I want to be able to tackle bigger objectives, but like, how do I find those other hard skills? Like, how do I piece together navigation, terrain management, all the things that go beyond just learning how to identify snow crystals and like dig a snow profile pit. So she recommended that we start this course at this amazing place called the Selkirk Lodge. It is outside of Revelstoke, British Columbia. You take a helicopter into the lodge. The lodge was started by a woman named Grania Devine, who just, had this vision with her husband at the time. He unfortunately died in an avalanche 6 months after they started building it. She had a 6-month-old. She still built this incredible lodge in the Selkirks, and she ran it up until 2 years ago. So in her own words, she has skied millions and millions and millions of vertical feet of powder. So Anne had this vision. We basically took this course at this lodge. Catherine attended this course. It's a 7-day ski mountaineering course for women. And it's an amazing experience. We've got amazing female guides that are part of the ACMG, the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, which is an really well respected accreditation, like a trade course essentially, where you have to have that accreditation to work as a ski guide in Canada. Kate Devine, Grania's daughter, is one of our lead guides. And then essentially we've kind of taken the experience of going to this 7-day ski mountaineering course, and we wanted to boil it down to something that was more accessible, because number one, it's really expensive to go to Canada for 7 days. The lodge itself is expensive. Backcountry skiing itself is expensive. Investing in all that gear and then realizing maybe you don't really actually like to backcountry ski that much, or maybe your risk tolerance is not quite there to be like doing those kinds of objectives. And so what we've done is we've boiled that down into our Alpine Development School course. And so what I wanted to talk to you about tonight was the 3 things that we cover in this course. And the first piece of it is risk management and decision making. So the kind of thing I want to kind of start off with is I'd love to get a sense of, if someone at the chat, if you don't mind dropping in, like, what's your like risk tolerance, like kind of knowledge or level. So I would say like, if put a 1 if you've never actually even been skiing or snowboarding before, you're just kind of here checking this out. I would mean risk tolerance in the sense of snow sports. Put a 3, maybe if you're like, oh, I've mastered the resort, but I've never gone in the backcountry. Put a 5 if you're like, oh yeah, you go backcountry touring all the time. I'd love to kind of get a sense of kind of who our audience is. And I'll just kind of keep an eye on the chat there. Perfect. So we got some 4s.
Claire, you want me to pop up a poll real fast?
If you feel like it, or looks like people are popping in the chat.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen. Awesome. Cool. This is great. This is really helpful just to make sure we get some good context going for the content itself. So one of the things that we talk about all the time at the Alpine Finishing School course is that, people show up with like all sorts of different experiences. They're there, maybe like this is maybe kind of one last step that they're like, maybe I want to pursue guiding professionally. I want to take this course to see how my skill set lines up. Or it could be like, okay, I've just like always tagged along with my significant other and I've never made a decision on my own in the backcountry. So when we developed this curriculum, we really had to think through what are really the layers of risk management and decision making, and how can you build a really strong foundation for that. So it's either a refresher for someone that knows it really well, or it's like good introductory course for someone that's like, I always tag along. I never have to make any decisions. So I've never felt any risk really. Like I wasn't really ever scared. I just put my head down on the skin track and I'm feeling good about it. And so what I want to, the one phrase that I feel like I could boil down of my, 8 years of going to the Alpine Finishing School are, what are the hazards and how can I manage them? I feel like what happens so often with backcountry skiing is there is this pressure and this urgency to, to get out, to explore, to ski fresh powder, right? That's the goal. Like we want to ski fresh pow. We want to have that pristine nature experience, but there's obviously danger involved. And it's kind of funny because I think women being very calculated, we can sometimes perceive more risk, but really it's this idea of hazards like that are, sometimes there's objective hazards, such as like those just exist on their own, right? That's like rock fall, crevasses, and ice fall, cornice, severe weather, any of the flags that lead to like avalanche, problems, wind, temperature change, new snow, etc. But then there's also just subjective hazards, which might relate to, your fitness ability and level, like the group that you're with and like how skilled everybody is. And so it's kind of one of these things that like, whenever you're going to kind of like approach being in the backcountry, you want to think about like, okay, what are the hazards and how can I manage them? If you're going on a very low danger day to ski mellow terrain, maybe some of the hazards that you're going to come across are more subjective. Maybe they're more related to the fact that you're with someone who's never gone ski touring before, and maybe you won't make it to your objective. And like, it could be a hazard that you'd be exposed in the sun for a really long period of time, or those kinds of things. So we always try to boil it down to this idea of like a risk management decision-making protocol. And so this is one of the courses that we offer through our Alpine Development School, where we explore this in more depth. The other piece that we talk about is risk tolerance. And this is something that for me over time, I've been backcountry skiing since 2003. This has changed a lot for me. My risk tolerance is, well, basically anyone's risk tolerance is the degree of risk you're willing to undertake in order to reach a goal. And everyone has their own level of that risk tolerance, and it shouldn't be a source of judgment towards ourselves or towards others. I've had 3 knee surgeries. I'm just at this point in my life where I'm like, okay, if I go and I push it and I go really, really hard, I might be out for like a few days. Is that where I want to be, or do I want to go skiing every single day? So this is an opportunity to like recognize that this is a really amazing entry point to discussion with your group of who you're going to go in the backcountry with. And I think that really having those relationship building moments of, hey, everyone, I would just love to discuss like my risk tolerance for the day. My risk tolerance for the day is that I feel, checking in with how you're feeling, right? Like, how are you feeling emotionally, physically? Did you get enough sleep the night before? There's all these interesting factors. And I feel like so often there's this sense like, oh, cool, I took an Avi 1 course, I'm ready to go backcountry skiing. And it's like, we all know, because, well, most I'd say people that are in tune with their personal kind of emotions and feelings, you go, God, my gut is just telling me that something is not right today. And I do think that there is a part of pushing past that helps to develop a stronger sense of your intuition. But I just wanted to pause and make sure that everyone knows that I feel like that's a really huge way we can break down some of that imposter syndrome, is to name what are the hazards that I'm going to face today and how can I manage them? And then like, what is my degree of risk tolerance for the day and in general? And that will start to help you find people that you actually really want to spend time in the mountains with, and not feel that pressure that's like, oh my gosh, that person just goes out all the time, I want to go skiing with them. Maybe you can find another way to ski with that person if their risk tolerance is different. Specifically in the backcountry, maybe it's that you ski at the resort with them, or in the spring, it's the thing that you do. So to move past imposter syndrome through this backcountry process, vulnerability is a huge part of that. So vulnerability is this concept with risk management that's like assessing the vulnerability of the group. So we've talked about hazards, we've talked about risk tolerance that you have, but assessing your vulnerability as a group or as an individual means considering the ability of you and your group to manage the hazards, right? So that would be like, okay, great, we're all kind of at the same risk tolerance, we know what the hazards are. Now let's talk about how we would actually move through various terrain, with this in mind. So for example, if part of your trip includes being exposed to a big cornice while skiing, then you might need to consider the vulnerability of you and your group in this terrain. This will also depend on like the size of your group. If you're touring with a group of 10 people, then I would probably think that it might make sense to choose a different objective for the day, because you can't safely manage the hazard with the vulnerability that your group has. So I want to kind of pause there for a second, because I feel like this kind of feeling of risk and tolerance and hazards is it feels a little intuitive, but it also might be some new information. And I'm just curious if anyone has any questions, or maybe Catherine, you remember something from your time at the Alpine Finishing School of chatting about this, because I remember it evoking a lot of conversation.
Oh man. I'm trying to think back to what year I actually went, but it's still like super vivid in my mind. I'll just say, if any of you ever have the desire and the ability to go on the Alpine finishing school, or even just go to, the Selkirk Lodge, do it. It's just a magical place, and it changes lives, and it changed mine. But no, I think what Claire is talking about, just with finding those people that you trust, and also just, I think we've talked about it in other events, and I'm sure, all courses talk a fair amount about having good partners that you really trust, and, vice versa, because you are putting your life in their hands and they're putting their lives in your hand. So it's all about making those connections and really gauging, you could talk to someone maybe on Clubhouse and they could tell you they're pretty risk averse or conservative, but once you're out there, it's all about figuring out and kind of seeing where they're actually at. And yeah, just trying to figure out like who those partners are that you really, I don't know, you mesh well with, and you're on the same page, because that's where you want to have fun. That's why we're going out there. And I think Alpine Finishing School was a really great way to figure out how to go about those conversations, as well as just kind of taking in the actions of each individual as well, because, they might say something and do something else. And so it's all about just figuring out like, where are they at? And then it also helps you figure out where you're most comfortable. I think I trust my gut a lot, and sometimes I'll push myself a little bit past it. But for the most part, when, we're dealing with avalanche safety and being out in the middle of nowhere, I personally find myself leaning more conservative. And I think that was something I developed through the Alpine Finishing School, just being able to kind of learn that about myself. So being able to go out in this learning environment surrounded by, there's like 14 women who are just total badasses, but also like from every sort of background and all abilities and all different shapes and sizes. And I don't know, it's just such a magical time, both the location and the lodge, but also just the camaraderie that was built, and being able to kind of tackle those mountains, both literal and figuratively, together. So do it. And I was not made for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine. I see we have a question here from Terry. Oh, Jen, were you going to call that out?
Yep.
Terry says, I was wondering over what time period you assess the hazards and vulnerabilities. It sounds like something like the day, assuming you're out for the day. I'm assuming you mean like kind of during the day. So actually, this is a perfect segue to what I was going to chat about next, Terry, and then let us know if we answer your question. But so what I've got here on the screen is this, it's called the Reasons Swiss cheese model. You can see why it's called Swiss cheese, but it's this idea that you're layering your decisions and that you never want all of the holes to match up. So starting up here at the top, you see there's some trip planning going on. So we're like, where are we going to go? What's the map say? Let's plan out our route plan. This is stuff that we teach. We teach how to like set up an actual tour plan. So you say, okay, this is the start where we're going to go. We're going to travel this far. We're going to take a break. We're going to go this much altitude. We're going to take a break where this is a decision point, et cetera. But you make a really detailed plan. You're probably going to eat a good breakfast, right? You're probably going to like make sure you have some good fuel in your body. You got to get going for the whole day. And then let's make sure that we have all the proper equipment. Do we have the safety techniques? Do we understand how to use all of our stuff? And of course, this is a bit more advanced. This is looking at like glacier travel. But even if you were just going out at your slack country for the day, you'd want to consider these things. Are you going to bring your avalanche gear? Like the answer is yes. Have you practiced? Do you know how to use the gear? If there was an accident, would you have all of those things in place? And really the idea is as long as you're not kind of like skimping somewhere along the line with these things, then you won't have a loss. You can limit your losses as much as possible. So no single layer can protect you from everything, which is why it's important to have several layers of risk management, making it harder for the stars to align basically. This model suggests that when the holes in your risk management layers line up with one another, an accident occurs. So Terry, to your question about like, when are you assessing the hazards and vulnerabilities? you'd want to prepare as much as possible and kind of keep an eye on like, okay, well, what are the hazards that I have? What are my hazards? Okay, well, I'm feeling kind of tired. I've been like working a ton and I've been sleeping well. And those are kind of like some subjective hazards, but what are those objective hazards? And what are the hazards? And we're going to talk about this when we talk about building your process. What are the other environmental factors? What's the confidence in the avalanche report? Is it trending towards more confident? Is there like less clarity and like, certainty in like what's going on? So it's unfortunately a lot of the answers to some of these questions that we get at these courses is it depends. But I would say that the shorter answer for you is you would want to assess your hazards as much as you can prior to starting your day, and then make sure that you have a general consensus amongst your group about what the other hazards you will face throughout the day are. And then you decide throughout that experience how that aligns with people's risk tolerance. And then making sure that you're creating that space for checking in. I will make a note that I've noticed in groups, especially, I hate to say this, of women, that conversation around checking in can sometimes take a really, really long time, which then ironically puts you at more exposure for risk, because now you have stood around talking about whether or not you should go and do something. And then now you have now missed the window of time when it was safe for you to go and do said thing. So it is important to kind of, again, prepare as much of that as you can ahead of time so that you are feeling like you already have the information and it's just a decision point where everyone can kind of check in with one another. And Mackenzie, I see you have another question here. How many days or reps do you find you need to feel really grounded in your risk tolerance, and how many days to practice with gear and gear management best practices for practicing with gear? This totally aligns with risk management. I would say that you can't practice too much with your gear. And I don't think that there's like a set number of reps or anything like that, but I do feel that it's important to consider your risk tolerance is going to change. So I don't think it's like, cool, I've lifted this much weight, so now I can lift that much weight all the time. That's going to change from day to day. And I think that it's just more important to kind of know when you are making up, and I say this from my own experience, making up other excuses for risk tolerance versus just being tired and just not wanting to go. I think there's like a general pressure to be like, oh my God, you have to want to go all the time. And maybe you don't. And like, maybe that's okay. So it's not a matter of reps, but it's just the reps really will build over time to give you better intuition to know how and where you feel good about going. Hopefully that answers your question, Kenzie. Cool. I'm going to keep rolling here. We're about halfway through. So this whole idea of let me see if sorry, I was just checking my slides. So there's also the human factor that plays to all of this, right? So like as your risk tolerance goes up, you'll start to have like familiarity with certain terrain, which can lead to bad decision making. You can be like, oh, well, I've been here a million times before. I've never seen an avalanche. So there's like definitely going to be fine. Or I always ski this. This is something I always ski. That's going to be kind of a flag for those heuristic kind of human factors that can help you, that can prevent you from really touching in with your intuition, and not just your intuition, but your risk management practices. What are the hazards and how can I manage them? If the hazard is, it's a high avalanche danger day, then you being like, well, I always ski this is not a good way to manage that. Acceptance. So this idea is, this is actually an acronym of facets. So familiarity, acceptance, consistency, expert halo, tracks and scarcity, and social facilitation. But I'll go through the really high level points. So acceptance, this idea is focusing on our need for acceptance by others. So someone willing to take risks in order to gain respect, kind of that Kodak courage piece. Consistency, this is also known as summit fever. So this idea that everyone in your party is like so committed to a goal that you're like, we're doing this no matter what. The expert halo, I think this happens a lot to men actually, where like men in a group are like, oh, you're the dude, so you know, right? And it also happens when women have the experience and they don't get like asked questions and they don't feel comfortable speaking up. So it kind of goes the other way around. Track/scarcity, when we go touring, we want fresh pow, right? Like that's the whole reason we're going for it. But making a decision to ski something because that's where the fresh line is maybe not always going to be the best decision. Terrain selection needs to be based on slope steepness and aspect and shape and avalanche potential, not how good the skiing is going to be. Social facilitation. So this is kind of similar to acceptance, but this is like this need to show off. So bragging rights, but it's not the reason to decide whether or not to ride a line. Which brings me to terrain as a defense. So I feel like I've had so many people ask me, why should I Alpine school? That's cool. Like, I don't know, like I go ski touring all the time. I'm like, they're like, I know how to do crevasse rescue. I know how to use ropes. I know all this. I think that you should literally, the only consistent thing in our world of mountains is terrain. We never know. The avalanche conditions are going to change everywhere we go. The snow quality is going to change. The shape of the mountains are going to change, but us being able to identify what terrain is and like these different terrain features, that will never change. From the South America all the way to the Canadian Rockies, I can pick out terrain features and then identify hazards related to how terrain is. So when I think of the curriculum we've shared at the Alpine Finishing School and at our online course that I'll share access to you all with, is really this idea that like you can actually go anywhere in the world with any amount of avalanche hazard, you know, obviously within reason, and you can learn how to make good decisions by learning how to identify terrain features. For example, convexities. I know this is kind of this idea between like a supported slope. Oh, sorry, I was trying to, this is circling out like kind of like, okay, well, look, this is like an unsupported area where there's a lot of tension on the slope. It's going to fall over. So it's like kind of as you're looking at something like this and you're going, oh, well, there's lots of fresh snow over there. Like, I kind of want to ski that. And you would just, even from afar, you would be able, if you were trying to route find your way up this, you would think to yourself, wow, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of a warm day. I guess I kind of want to stay in the shade there. I guess I'll just kind of stay in the shade versus identifying, oh, I think that could be a convex rollover that's not supported, and understanding that as you're in the terrain, you can find ways to work your way up the potential steepness. So for example, this idea of area of tension, of there being slope shape. Again, this is by no means a replacement for an avalanche course or for continuing your education in this regard. But I did want to share some examples of kind of how terrain identification and management, like when snow is the problem, terrain is the solution, right? Like this is how ski areas understand what terrain they can open or they can't open. And so that really unlocks confidence through practice over time. So you can develop that confidence when approaching, again, like I said, unfamiliar areas. And it also helps you to avoid complacency in familiar areas. If you think about it, I've definitely skied in bounds at resorts before when I've kind of like had my like spidey sense pick up, because I'm like, wow, this is really wind loaded terrain and I'm the first person in here. I mean, I know ski patrol are, you know, gods and goddesses of the world, but they make mistakes too. And we all know that there have been inbounds burials. So I'm always kind of like identifying the terrain that I'm skiing in, even if I could do it with my eyes closed because I've skied it a million times. It helps to just practice that kind of sense of when I'm in the backcountry, do I want to put tracks down this particular slope? Sorry, I'm just pulling my notes back up here. So for example, working on that ongoing process of refinement and reflection. So again, like kind of looking here and like seeing like, okay, well, where did everybody else go? If you were looking back at a really complex piece of terrain like this, it's kind of a fun game to play. Like, cool, how would I try to get up that if I could? That's probably a pretty intense example, but this idea of kind of taking it down into bite-sized pieces. This is actually a perfect example. So this is actually the terrain at the Alpine Finishing School. So this is the Justice Glacier here. This is Espresso Peak, Divine Peak. And really it's kind of funny because like all of this stuff gets skied, but we actually call it Big Tiger Country. It's like really complex terrain. It's when you're on it, it doesn't feel that intense, right? But there's like crevasses and there's like wind lips and like rollovers and all this, but there are ways to approach all of this terrain. Over time, you learn those kinds of practices and skills, so that you can start to like kind of break things down. So some of the terrain types that we identify a lot are like convexities, as I mentioned, concavities, planar slopes, which are basically like kind of featureless slopes, like flat, right? Benches, which are amazing tools for gaining elevation when you're in terrain. Confined or unconfined creek beds, depending on what part of the world you live in, that could be like a very everyday reality when you go touring, which is like We've all been in those really tight creek beds where you're like, this is miserable. And like, I don't know why I backcountry ski anymore. Ribs, which are kind of those vertical, I guess, barrier, if you will, between slopes that can be confining for track setting. Gullies, right? Those are potential terrain traps. So again, just learning how to identify those things is the first step. You don't have to be knowing how exactly to practice it when you're going ski touring, but just learning to do that is a really good way to do that as well. I'm going to look at some of these questions here, and I don't know, does someone have any questions right now? I'm going to read through some of the things here that has been popped into the chat.
Claire, I feel like if you can, with this slide that you have up, I feel like it'd be really helpful if you could even just use your mouse to show, like, here's an area where you would not want to, like, for example, look at this big wind lip along this ridge. So we would, like, can you maybe use this image to show, here's some no zones, here's more yes zones, and if people think that's not helpful in the comments, you can say, don't do that, Claire. But I feel like that might be a cool thing to even see, like, the decision-making you would make in this terrain.
Yeah, for sure. Can you all see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I could use some other cool tool, I'm sure. But so we're looking at really complex terrain because, as you can see in here, they're sags. They're known as sags. They're basically crevasses. So this is all ice, and then there's snow on top of it. And this was actually a relatively thin snow year. So this is the spring. So we actually were dealing with some pretty complex conditions. But what you can't see over here, I mean, this is a beautiful photo, right? But there's actually, like, there's always a way to go around something. So some no-go areas here. If I were wanting to ascend, for example, let's say I'm trying to get to the top of Divine Peak here. What you can't see over here, which is unfortunately, is that this is a really big ramp here that goes down. So what I've done multiple times before is, this is Christine. She's one of our guides that teaches the Alpine Development School. So Christine's looking back over this, but you can see this skin track here. How we approach Divine Peak is we would come over here, we ski down this pretty mellow little ramp you can see down here, and then we have to gain all the way back over into this bowl here. And then that's a decision point, because there's a big cornice that we're looking at, that we want to make sure we have a group of 14 people. How fast can we move through the terrain? How fast are people moving? And then what we've done before is we get up to the top of this col here, which is kind of a saddle, like a low point between two mountains. We'll get up there, and then the guides will do another assessment. So we've still got our eyes set on getting up here, but they do another assessment. And then we slowly make our way up this ramp. And so obviously, like, if you thought about it, you might be like, oh, cool. Well, couldn't you just like hike up this whole front here? Like, couldn't you just like go boot pack up the space? Which I'm sure in some conditions you could. It certainly wouldn't be the most energy efficient way to get up there. But the point is, you want to set up your decision making so that you have as many decision points along the way to then decide, okay, this is actually like a good decision for us to be doing. Starting early is a really good way to do that. And then sure enough, we've skied this particular line many, many times. But over here, for example, if we were like kind of trying to look at how to approach this, you might be able to see it, probably not, but there's actually, you can see a skin track right here. So this gives you kind of a sense of scope and scale. So it's like right now, you can approach this big glaciated, scary area from below with local knowledge. When you're dealing with glaciers, it's good to have a sense of, like, obviously global warming is real. These glaciers are receding and disappearing. But, up until you're on the actual ice, you're just approaching a pretty mellow slope, and you're able to get up there and then make another decision. And you're not under a lot of hazard as you're doing it. So it's really just about making decisions where you're like, how exposed am I right now while I'm doing this? As opposed to, oh, well, I don't think the slope I'm going to ski is going to avalanche, right? How are you going to get there safely and piece that together? I was going to use that other example of that really complex piece of terrain, but I don't know if I could really like splice that apart on the spot. Cool. Cool. Mackenzie had another question here. Oh, cool. Terry says, I've seen the Swiss cheese model with COVID precautions. Exactly right. It's actually a perfect risk model tolerance for a lot of things. Is it better to go with guides more often than not, even after A1, A2, to build good habits, or just pick low angle mellow lines? Mackenzie, I get this question a lot. We get this question at the Alpine Finishing School a lot. It's like, oh, how will I know when I'm ready? It's like that Whitney Houston song, how will I know? Like, you won't really like know until you go. more, but I think that what happens is, and we need to just cruise along. I feel like the backcountry process slide will help you to kind of think about this. So basically it's kind of this idea of like, we've talked about risk management, we've talked about decision making, terrain management. When it comes to like building your process of how all of this comes together, I think to your point, it does start with, choosing an appropriate objective, bringing the right gear and checking it, right? So actually let's start with number 1 down here. So getting the forecast. So choosing an appropriate objective would include that. Bring the right gear, bring enough food and water. We're kind of before step 1 right here. And then basically, like checking the weather, identify the vulnerability of your group. Do you and the rest of your group have skills to manage the hazards you expect to encounter? Coming up with strategies to manage or mitigate the hazards. So it can feel really complicated, but I think what ends up happening is you just create this to be a daily process, and you'll find, and the studies actually show that your intuition is like scientifically there to like guide you through this experience and process. Like it's similar to learning any new thing, right? At first it's so hard and clumsy and like scary and I don't know, but you just take things one step at a time. So you get the forecast, know what to expect before you go, right? Here we are, we're on number 2. Plan the trip, match the terrain to the forecast that you just saw, check your gear. And then do this even if you were going out with guides or not, right? That's how you start to really flex those muscles. Verify the conditions when you're out there, right? Were they worse than expected or not worse? Like, how does that change how your plan is for the day? Using good travel habits. So I know, for example, I know this. I'm sure there are people here that have had this happen. If you're in the Wasatch, I'm sure you have experienced this. It's this whole like, oh, well, I can just go straight up the slope. Why wouldn't I do that? No, that is horrible. Who wants to do that? It's the worst idea. Your calves are burning. You're so tired. You get to the top, you're drenched in sweat. And the person that did switchbacks the whole way up, they're coming up at the exact same time as you. And they're like, feeling good. Yeah. Don't, it's just an easy trap to fall into where like the good travel habits follow the background because you're like, oh, well, I could just go straight up this thing. It's going to be faster. It's not going to be faster. I'm just going to tell you that right now. I'll save you a lot of time. It's not going to be faster. But that will also minimize your risk because you're going to stay within your plan, right? Like your plan wasn't to go straight up something. It was to gain like a certain ridge or something like that. And then evaluating those slopes, right? Like assessing it as you travel. So to your point, Mackenzie, like evaluating the slope as you are doing it, like as you're talking about like skiing low, mellow angle lines. If you want to step up to something more than that, just practice on those mellow, low angle lines, all of these steps, and you'll really have more confidence to then make your decision of whether or not you feel certain in the conditions, in the weather, in your ability to manage hazard, on how you can step up into those bigger terrain pieces. And then I think this is the most important part and a perfect way for us to end this this presentation tonight, which is let's disrupt gatekeeping and imposter syndrome in the backcountry by creating a consistency towards reflection after a day. It doesn't matter how basic and how simple your day was. How did it go? How did everybody feel? How did you feel? Were there points in the day when you didn't really like something that happened? How can you learn from it? How can you share that with the people that you go touring with? I think that there's actually a lot of males that I know that would like to have more space for this kind of dialogue. Not to like have a binary way of thinking on it, but like I do know a lot of guides that like this is something that they do professionally, but then when it's this kind of like, you know, casual recreationalist mentality, it's like, oh, we don't have time for that. Just crack open the beers. Well, sure, have a debrief over a beer. Like, you know, like just make time for it, make space for it, because that will really help you to find your voice and how to describe these things. And then when it really comes time to speak up in those decisions, when someone's making a decision that you're not comfortable with, it's not that you just go, well, I just don't feel comfortable. You're able to say, hey, these are the hazards. This is how we said we were going to manage them. We're not doing that. And I told you my risk tolerance was this, and this isn't happening with that. And it's back to that Swiss cheese model. You're able to really pinpoint on what it is and not just say, well, I didn't really like how you made that, you know, skin track. That might be part of it. All right, I'm going to pause there. We're almost out of time, and I just want to make sure there's time for questions and for anything else. So
Thank you, Claire. I feel like every time we do one of these events, what I appreciate so much about it is how it gets me thinking about what do I need to be thinking about next time I go out into the backcountry. And there's actually a handful of us on this call right now who are going to be going out and doing some snowcat access skiing in the Eastern Sierra on Monday and Tuesday. And just like thinking about all of these things is so helpful. So thank you for that. As Claire said, we have 10 minutes left. Now is a time where you can ask any questions you have, Claire, for 10 minutes. You can pop it in the chat. Well, not any, there's might be some questions that Claire will say, I'm 100% not going to respond to that. So, but you could always try her, who knows? But we have 10 minutes left. So you can pop a question in the chat, or you're also welcome to unmute yourself and video talk if you'd like. But any questions for Claire?
Let me just say real quick, like a little plug. I just dropped this in the chat. So the link in there, and I think we're going to show this out on the Clubhouse as well. Yeah. So that's a link to a recording from our 2021 online Alpine Development School. It's a 3-part series led by Christine Faliki. She's actually the first female ACMG splitboard guide, like legend status, like so cool. So Christine led that course this year. It's 3 nights. Each course is $15, but there's $5 off. It should work for every ticket. So theoretically it's $10 per course for you, but we cover those 3 things I talked about tonight. So building your process, risk management, and terrain. So check it out.
All right, I'm gonna ask you a question, Claire. What tips do you have or strategies if you are in a situation you don't want to be in the backcountry? Say you're in a group and your intuition is kicking in and you're like, I should not be here. How would you suggest somebody navigate that?
That's a great question, and certainly happened to me before and ended up okay. And I know other people it's happened to before and it hasn't ended up okay. I always like to kind of break it down before I would bring it up to the group. I would really want to make sure I'm thinking as objectively as possible about why I don't feel good about the situation. And that's going to really help the rest of the group to understand that it's coming from a place of knowledge and and not from a place, again, I think of kind of other fear that pops in, of like, kind of like, oh, I'm not, like imposter syndrome. Like, and I get it too. Like, I'm not strong enough to ski this. I'm so tired. I'm all those kinds of things. So I would just take a second to check in with myself and ask that again, that phrase, what are the hazards and how can I manage them? Because if you're in a situation where you feel like you can't manage those hazards, then, really the right answer probably is going to say to go back down the skin track, that you just came up, which is like, no, of course, no one wants to put all that work in to do that. But I think it takes a lot more guts to bail from a line than it does to ski it and just hope for the best. But certainly it will help the rest of the group to kind of understand where you're coming from. If you're like, not just, I just think you're just being kind of a jerk about this, versus they might be being a jerk about something, but it'll help them to understand that you're coming from it from an objective place of evaluation of hazard. Does that kind of make sense, Jen?
Yeah, for sure. And, when you think about it sort of alternatively, if you're somebody who feels confident in a particular situation and you're with somebody who maybe doesn't, do you have advice on how to support that person in a situation?
Oh yeah, that's that's a really frequent question. And it happens actually a lot, even at the Alpine finishing school, when people have kind of invested like tons of money and time to go to this course. And then all of a sudden, then they're there and they're being guided, right? So like they're in a really safe environment. And then they're kind of like, oh, well, I don't know, like, should we? Because sometimes the guides will put people out in front, right? It's okay, like, let's have you all make some decisions. Like, we're here watching, but let's have you make the decisions. And when people are, it's just, I think it's kind of this like real balance between having the time to have like enough discussion, right? Again, sometimes if you go too far into the discussion mode, you can put yourself at further risk of just spending too much time in a certain place. But I would say that if I were in that position where I maybe had a bit more experience and I was like, someone said that they were really uncomfortable, I would use the same method. I would just say, okay, like, let's talk about what you are concerned about. And then let's like work backwards from that. If it's, I'm worried I can't ski that, versus I'm worried that we're going to be in an avalanche versus I'm worried about, I have an injury. It feels like it just allows more of an honest, open dialogue space to work backwards from, as opposed to like, oh, shut up, you're just being sensitive, like it's fine. And I'm sure we've all experienced stuff like that before in the outdoors. So it's a good way to kind of practice, just like, okay, what are the hazards, how to manage them, and then kind of work backwards from there. I think there's a question. No. Oh, so there is an Alpine finishing school. So I saw Lisa Harper was saying about the Alpine finishing school. It's sold. I would have been promoting this whole time, but it sold out for this year. But that's why I've been promoting the Alpine Development School that's online. I do recommend getting on the wait list though. So, okay, this is really cool. So for 9 years, we hosted our Alpine finishing school at the Selkirk Lodge, flying in a helicopter, 7 days at this like pretty cushy lodge. And then basically what happened was they raised their prices a ton, and it was like, oh my God, this really inaccessible course just became even more inaccessible. So we decided to kind of flip things around and also make things a bit more safe with COVID for this year. So we're actually offering, this year we offered 3 Alpine finishing school courses, 2 traverses. So we offered the Spearhead Traverse outside of Whistler, and then the Curry to Wedge Traverse. If you're not familiar with what a traverse is, it's basically like you're ski touring, but you have all of your stuff on your back, moving from point A to point B. So the Curry to Wedge Traverse includes a helicopter drop. And then you ski from Mount Curry to the Wedge, and then you ski out. So that's really cool. And then our Backcountry Base Camp, which again is the one, if you were really interested, please get on the wait list for that, because there's definitely usually people that bail at the last minute, but that's actually a snow camping 4-day excursion where you're learning all the stuff that we talked about, but actually also learning how to snow camp comfortably. So we take a helicopter in, get a nice big camp set up. So it's, comfort, but maybe not a cushy lodge. And then next year, we're going to be offering those same options plus the 7 days at the Selkirk Lodge. So we're trying to expand all of our offerings, and the prices are just much lower to do the traverses for folks that can't afford to go to the Selkirk Lodge. So yeah, get on that wait list. I'm sorry. It was a pilot program this year. We only had like 6 spots for each traverse, so it's pretty small. It wasn't like you were sleeping on it. It was an easy one to fill.
Claire, I have a question that came in as a direct message to me from Terry about how the finishing school would compare to like a Knowles course. I mean, obviously it's, or maybe you could also discuss how it would compare to like an Airy Abbey 1 versus like a Knowles or an Outward Bound snow specific course. Can you break that down for everybody in a few minutes?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that at the Alpine finishing school, because we're in a snow environment and we're all relying on each other for safety, we do cover companion rescue to a certain extent. We essentially ask that everybody that comes to the Alpine finishing school courses already has a minimum of their Abbey 1 in the States, or an AST 1 in Canada. And then from there, in terms of the comparison, I would say that all of our curriculum focus is probably more similar to like a Knowles course, I would guess, than it is to an Airy level 1. We're not focusing as much on snow science as we are focusing on the tools and hard skills that like kind of help you go from being like, cool, I know how to backcountry ski and I kind of go on these known routes, to being like, I want to ski that mountain. How do I do that? And then putting those skills together. So it's a bit more like a Knowles course, I would say. Although we are looking at next year offering an AST 1 certification, which the Canadian equivalent essentially of an Airy 1 course, which actually some argue is a bit more stringent than an Airy level 1. So if you're looking for a way to kind of step up your Abbey game, but maybe you're not ready for an Abbey 2, you could take an AST 1, and we're looking at offering that next year at our courses.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We have a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions left for Claire, either about SheJumps, the finishing school, the 3-part virtual course that she shared that discount code with, or any sort of avalanche prep, travel, mitigation?
Got
Anyone?
a hand up.
Ooh.
I have a question.
Oh, hi, Julia. Yeah, what's your question? Hi.
Hi. So you talked about it earlier. I call it analysis paralysis, where you kind of sit either at the trailhead or the night before, or even on the trail itself, and you have this big, long, heated discussion. Generally it's right with my female friends, which is interesting. You have this long discussion, you get to a point where there's times where we've just turned back, or, you know, things were not as cool as they could have been. Do you have any like tips for getting out of those kind of like, where some people are nervous, other people aren't, and you kind of get in this spot where you just discuss to no end, and sometimes miss your chance, you know?
Yeah, I would love to. I wish I had like one of my guide friends here to kind of like, I mean, I guess when you're a guide, you're like, okay, we're either going or we're not. Like they've already made the decision if they're going or not going. And it's like kind of up to the person to be like, you're either not going or you're going, because the guide has made the decision that it's safe to do that. And then the person has to self opt out at some point. But I would say it kind of reverts back to like the answer I gave Jen, which is like, eat the elephant one bite at a time. Make the decision to say like, do we feel like what are the flags that like, what's the avalanche report? Like starting with like kind of an objective source of knowledge and information. That's like kind of just this way of being like, okay, well then now let's decide what our next decision point's going to be, you know, and then like kind of keeping people moving. Cause usually once people start skinning, start moving, start getting the blood pumping, like kind of feel a little bit better about things. And like you check your conditions as you're ascending, right? So then you're making new decisions along the way. And if you're seeing some of those red flags, then it's a better way than to say like, let's just like not even start at the trailhead. So it's kind of like, it's again, I think it comes back to that pre-planning piece where you can say, okay, everyone, like, let's meet at the trailhead. And before we meet at the trailhead, I just wanted to say, I checked the weather. These are the hazards I'm seeing. Before we go, like, let's just keep an eye because we have to be moving by this time. And then that way you kind of like set also time barriers that help to be like, great, we're going to start moving. And then this is our decision point. And that's one of the things we cover a lot is like how to do those trip planning and tour planning, which is, you know, you can get those cards downloaded. They're super fun to fill out. Like, okay, start one, trailhead. We're going to travel for this far, this many miles, this many vertical feet. And then this is our decision point. And it helps people to feel a little bit more comfortable. Hopefully that answers your question, Julia.
It does. Thank you very much. It's helpful.
Thank you. Well, it's 6 o'clock. Well, 6 o'clock in my world. So that means that this installment of Backcountry Beta is officially coming to an end. Thank you so much, Claire, for taking the time to be here with us tonight and share that. I mean, it is like, I've known you for so long. You're one of my first snow sports industry friends, because, you know, I'm a nobody, and you were one of like the first people who I met so many years ago. And you've always just been such an inspiration and just incredible resource to our community. So I want to encourage everyone. You can find Claire in the clubhouse. She's there. So you also, when I post this video, you're welcome to ask any additional questions there. I also want to thank you, Catherine, for always being, you know, like the sidekick I'm so excited to see once a month, and all the support from True Gear. It may not come it might be a surprise to people, or maybe not. There's not a whole lot of brands owned by men who want to partner up with Coalition. That's just the simplest way I can state that. So it's really cool to be able to work with you specifically, and know that we also have the support of Chris and everybody there at
She's a woman at heart. Yeah.
And thank you everybody who took time out of your evening to be here with us tonight. And like I said, like, these are always so good for me because it just helps me think about like being in that backcountry mentality and that risk assessment mentality that we really want. So thank you to everyone. Put February 2nd on your calendar for the next installment. We'll be publishing that event in the clubhouse in probably about 2 weeks. Next week, you'll see this recording. I will make sure to put the link to the Eventbrite plus the code. And also, Sarah G shared a great article from the New York Times that I will pop in there as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Happy New Year again. Tiptoe. Shh. Let's keep our fingers crossed for this one. Reach out to any of us anytime in the clubhouse, and we will see you next month.
Bye, thank you. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.